Welcome back. We'll go on to our next committee this afternoon, which is the Finance and Personnel Committee, chaired by Councilmember Roxanne Murphy.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to convene the Finance and Personnel Committee. I am joined on this committee by Councilmembers Vargas and Hamill. We have one agenda item. It's a 2017 third quarter financial review. Mr. Henshaw, please take it away.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Council. Brian Henshaw, Finance Department. Today we'll be presenting the summary of the third quarter financials. These are the numbers for the citywide financials through September. The complete financial report is posted online at cob.org under the Finance Department reports. That along with the presentation. Today I'll start with the building permit activity. This is a 3-year trend for the building permit activity. Year to date through September, you can see we did $123 million this year. This is down from the prior 2 years of about $160 million last year, but it is a good, strong trend. The mix has changed a little bit. We do have an increase in both single-family and multifamily permit activity, which is good for housing. Where it's a decrease from last year really is in this segment here, which is new commercial industrial mix. And it typically, this could just be 1 or 2 large projects. So this would be a new mixed-use building in the millions of dollars, which could make some of that up. But good, strong numbers. This is leading the charge both for citywide revenue and permit activity. You'll see on the next slide jobs. This is Whatcom County jobs activity through September. We're averaging about 94,000 jobs. This is approximately 3,500 jobs higher than last year. So this largely due to the construction activity and housing markets. I pulled up the unemployment rates today. It's 4.5% in Bellingham, 4.6% for the state. It's the first time, I think, in a little while that we've been below the state average in unemployment rate, so that's a good trend. And then nationally, it's 4.1, so jobs continue to be strong. Citywide revenues have increased from $175 million in 2016 to $188 million this year. That's a 7% increase. I'd like to take a little time just to explain this graph. On the top here in this lighter color is the budgeted revenues for the 9 months. This will be the 2017 activity, and then last year's activity is a dark color here at 2016. So you see in this other category, I'll just point this out, we're ahead of both budget and last year. This is largely due to real estate excise tax. REIT tax is up 9%. That's the money we collect from all the real estate transactions in Bellingham. A strong year for housing market and buildings. The next one I'll point out to you is a change. It's an accounting change mandated by the state. We used to account for the health benefit fund revenue under miscellaneous. You see now it's down here in interfund sales. That's the money that we collect from all the different funds into the health benefit to pay for health benefits for the city. The next thing I'll point out here is grants. Even though we're ahead of last year in grant revenue, we are significantly below the budgeted number, largely due to 2 things. One, capital projects take 1 to 2 years on typical. And then the second, of course, we're all aware of the state capital budget, which has not been resolved. We have a number of projects that are underway, both grant-related and not, that we are waiting for a resolution at the state level to hopefully collect some more of that revenue. Property tax, you see that we have a large portion still below budget. That's because property tax comes in twice a year in October. So in October and November, this will get up to the budgeted amount. Sorry?
Did you do B&O?
Not yet. Yeah, I'll talk about, sorry. B&O and sales tax are both strong for the year. I wasn't going to cover every one. I'll talk a little bit more under the general fund category here, but B&O tax is up 6% for the year, and sales tax is up 7% for the year, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So citywide revenues are continuing to be strong. Going over to citywide expenditures, they've increased from last year from $159 million to $167.5 million. This is a 5% increase. Again, as I alluded to on the prior slide, capital outlays are where we're significantly below budget. We are producing more or having more capital projects year to date than we did last year. And then you'll see that we're below budget on benefits, but again ahead of where we were last year as salaries and benefits and wages continue to increase. The other one I'll point out here just briefly is service charges. This has to do with professional services largely that can be related to capital projects. So these two are directly related to each other, but also have to do with just other charges and projects that may not be capitalized. So just on an accounting differential there. Now I'll talk about the general fund revenues. They've increased from $53.4 million last year to $57.2 million. This is a 7% increase, so a good, strong 9 months of the year. The big one here is ahead of budget and last year is miscellaneous. This was for the land sale. You may recall that the port exercised their option for that land. That shows up here under miscellaneous. Charges for service are slightly below both budget and last year. This is the change that we are no longer receiving revenue in the library for shared revenue from the county. We are no longer eligible for that revenue. And also, there's been a decrease in fines and enforcement, mainly to do with parking enforcement that is below last year. So that's something that's changed from last year. Property tax, again, I mentioned earlier, this will be collected in October and the beginning of November. And now sales tax. I'll talk about sales tax, 7% increase over last year. It's a good growth. B&O tax is about 6%. Again, most of this directly attributed to construction industry. So on this slide here, you see it broken down by industry. Across the board increases for all 8 categories. The only one that's slightly below last year is clothing, but you see all these others are ahead of last year. Construction is up 22%. Vehicles and parts is the other large increase, which is 21%. But I will point out that construction is also building materials. That's going to the home improvement stores. You might get also specialty trade and also wholesale. So all 3 of these, in addition to construction, are related to not only the construction industry but home sales too. So people buy homes, they go buy drapes, they buy washers and dryers. So all those are directly related to that strong category. General fund expenses are also increased. They're up from $53.5 million last year to $57.5 million. That's a $4 million increase, or 7%. $2 million of that increase is down here in these 2 categories, personnel benefits and salaries and wages. So we've added a number of people. Also with cost of living increases, those 2 continue to go up. Salaries and benefits now attribute 71% of the total general fund expenses. So out of this $57.5 million, that's $41 million in the first 9 months of this year are on salaries, benefits, and wages. General fund expenses by departments. You'll see here that we are on track. All departments are at or below budget, with the one exception, which is fire. And this I've talked about earlier this year is the change. We assumed 8 full-time employees when we took over the management operation agreement with Fire District 8. So we are slightly ahead of budget for that reason, and also training and academies that happened earlier in the year. The other thing I'll point out is non-departmental expenses. These are citywide programs and expenses or subsidies that are paid for through the general fund. They pay for things such as debt service, the cemetery operational subsidy. We also pay for maintenance repairs that go into the facilities fund. These are non-department specific expenses that are paying for citywide or general fund obligations. So if you add all 3 of these top 4 departments together, that's 74% of our general fund budget. So this is 74%. The other 25% is above that. So any questions so far on citywide revenues or general fund revenues? All right, we'll go now into the major enterprise funds. Enterprise funds are funds that are run more like a business. User fees and or specific revenues pay for those. So the first one we'll talk about is the street fund, and I changed the format a little bit. So this is a snapshot, so you see both revenues and expenditures on one slide for the fund. I'll just quickly go through. This is prior year, so the first 9 months of 2016, current year, first 9 months of 2017. This will be the percent change between these two. And then this is the total budget, and then you have the percent of the budget. So anything above 75 on the revenue side is a good indicator, and anything above 75 on the expense side would be an indication that we're spending money faster than what we've budgeted. The highlights here, I just go through as I would look at this. You see sales tax, again, up 7% sales tax money we split between the general fund and the street fund. Here you see that there is a negative over last year. We're collecting less federal revenue, grant shared revenue, and I talked about that as in regard to not only the timing of projects, but also the amount of grant revenue tied up in the state capital budget. Entitlements and revenue sharing in the street fund have to do with the fuel tax revenue that we receive. This is to pay for the streets. And then here where we've highlighted them with an explanation, this is a developer contribution for Horton Road. So the majority of this 18% increase is right here on this one line item. So that's another way to look at not only what is positive or negative, but the reasons behind what that is. On the operating side, it's flat overall, but that's largely attributed to this, professional services and repairs. So in the street, these projects are just underway. We have the granary project, which was just awarded, along with West Maplewood, which will continue throughout the winter in the next 14 months for granary. So we'll see a lot of this capital project be processed, and that'll increase not only on their operational, but we'll also draw down on the revenue side too. Similar in the water fund, we see the major change up here is the conversion from unmetered to metered. That is now 100% completed as far as the installation of meters. The billing will catch up at the beginning of January. We start those at the beginning of each January for everybody that was converted in the prior year. But you see overall our revenue is only 58% of budgeted, but again that comes back to this line item right here, which is other revenues. We have a large water pretreatment plant project that's underway right now. You see the capital expenditures down here, but unfortunately this was a state capital delay. We have a loan that's going through the state that right now is on hiatus. So we are cash flowing this project. It's a $12 million project over the next 14 months out of reserves. If this is resolved quickly at the state level, there might be an ability to still draw down on this grant. That remains to be seen, and we'll have to weigh all those pros and cons when the state budget is finally resolved. But the large work in process is the other thing I'll point out here. We've done over twice as much work as we did last year at this time, but there's $20 million backlog in the water fund. So we've got a large project that makes up over half of that, and that's that one project. On the watershed, which is a portion, watershed fees to protect Lake Whatcom, you'll see a 1% increase in just the charges, a large increase here in the demands, which is 162% above last year. This was for a density bonus that was purchased for $240,000. And then here we also have some miscellaneous revenue, which were under budgeted and behind for last year. You see we budgeted quite a bit of money here. There was 2 grant projects that were eligible for, again, tied up in the state budget that we hope to get a resolution for, or we will continue on. We're working with Public Works to decide if these projects, they're ready to go on the construction and the engineering. It was just on the grant funding that we were waiting on, but we might press forward with those before, but we'll keep you posted on those. Salaries and wages and benefits is increased. We now have dedicated staff for the conservation efforts in the watershed. Capital and debt, the big increase or decrease here from last year is that in 2016 there was an interfund loan that was used to purchase land that has now been paid off, and so now we have just the normal debt service associated with the watershed. That's the negative 37%. So overall in good shape. The last enterprise fund I'll talk about is the wastewater fund. Again, you see a large negative here of of 7% from last year. But if you go right here, you'll see it's all attributed to this other revenue. So last year, we not only completed the wastewater treatment plant expansions, we received $2.6 million from Lake Whatcom Water Sewer District. They prepaid. We were assuming that they wanted to pay that over time, but they actually took out a bond and prepaid us, so we had a big lump sum payment here. So this is just the accounting change from those things from one year to another. Again, we're a little bit below on repairs and maintenance. We have a lot of design work and capital projects that are underway, including the mid-biennium adjustment for the $2 million worth of repairs for the pipe that broke at the wastewater treatment plant. So some of that piping has to be manufactured, prefabbed, so we will see larger expenses here in the short term in the next couple months. And then in the finance department, we combine all of the available cash from all 50-plus funds in the city that are restricted for various purposes, either by RCW, state law, or by policy, or just for the bonds that we have outstanding for debt service. We combine those into an investment pool. The investment pool is not only by policy, but restricted to the types of investments that we can do. Right now, we have about 79% in federal agency bonds. We have 7.9 or just under 8% in municipal bonds, and then the rest is in the state pool, which is more like a cash or a money market account, including Opus Bank. This is a cash account that we can draw down at any time. Yield to maturity, this is based on a 365-day maturity. We compare it to two benchmarks. The state pool is one, and also a 2-year treasury bond. You can see we're earning approximately 1.4% now on our money. It's slightly better than both the state and the treasury, but I will point out that you can't just look at yield to maturity. You do need to look at duration, or the length of time that we can invest in. The state pool is 1 year or less, and actually most of their money is 6 months or less. So, and then this is a 2-year treasury. Our financial policy allows me to invest to 5 years, but our average duration, our average investment right now is about 2.6 years. So all of those go into the factor of yield to maturity. But interest rates are rising. This will have big implications to the housing market, and we will watch that as we continue in the future. Any questions?
Thank you for always helping us be cautiously optimistic. Committee members, Councilmember Hamel.
I apologize for not knowing this. Is our 12% reserve an RCW, or is that via BMC?
That is actually just a policy, a financial policy established in 2010 by council.
When we cash flow a significant project like the pre-treatment facility, how does that affect that 12%?
Yeah, so the water pre-treatment facility is actually paid for out of water reserves currently. And at this point, that is the plan in the short term, unless there is not a resolution, or we determine that we would need to set up some sort of interfund loan, and then we would come back to council. Council needs to approve all interfund loans, and we would set up the parameters for the loan, the length of time for the loan. Interfund loans are set up to pay. It's a variable rate based on whatever I can earn on the investment side, so that one fund doesn't benefit another fund, and we would bring that back to council for approval. I will point out, I mean, it's a great question. There is a list in the financial report that's put out monthly, and it goes through each cash position of each fund. So I was just referring to that as you were asking the question. And right now, the water fund has just under $17 million of cash and reserves in it, so that's where that is being paid for. We are having to monitor it, because last week we had a $600,000 payable just for that one project, so, and that's probably for the month. So we are looking at both the project and the expense side, which is between $600,000 and $1 million a month, and then the next 14 months, and then we'll work with Public Works to make sure all their other projects, and as we go forward, that we're paying for that.
But those are dedicated funds.
They are dedicated funds to water. Yeah, they're water fund projects and water fund eligible expenditures. Thank you.
I'm just trying to understand from a project management perspective. You know, we have a certain amount of money that we're using to cash flow this project. Do we then stop the project when we run out of those funds, or how does that work?
Yeah, so this is a little bit unusual where the state has limited a loan, and it's unusual because we've already started the project. So it's very disconcerting to see the legislators do that, because usually it's for future projects and then we can decide. The two watershed projects are ones that we're looking at now because there's a construction window, the state budget, and then how much we can afford to do, and then the priority of those. So internally we have those conversations, and then if we need to figure out another mechanism to pay for it, we come back to council with a proposal to say that this projects need to go forward. Here's how we're proposing to fund those. Right now I don't think that we need to do that, and Public Works and I will keep you informed on those if they change. We're hopeful that there'll be a change at the state level very soon, if not a special session in January under the regular session with the election results.
Thank you.
Councilmember Vargas, please.
Brian, a couple questions about revenue. The liquor and cannabis tax, where is that included, or does that get held because of the capital budget? Are those interlinked or not?
Yeah, they would be in. So under the citywide, they're probably showing up under other taxes in a very small degree. And then in the general fund, they are brought into the general fund. So let's see, you said marijuana and liquor all come into the general fund, so they would also be here under other taxes. The dollar amounts, cannabis is less than $100,000. We've talked about that before. Liquor excise profits and taxes is now about $700,000, and they are approximately what they were last year, so we continue to see those. But
have we received our cannabis payments this year?
We've received them, but they went down slightly from before.
I'm a little confused because I know our increase was actually supposed to go up in regards to our allotment, and it's supposed to be higher than our liquor revenue, so I don't understand why it's less.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yep, go ahead.
Our liquor split has been a traditional split, and there's been an erosion of that split over time. At first, the promise was that we would be getting more money out of the marijuana tax, but the truth is, when they went to look at how they should split it, we were not given. I think that it didn't meet the expectations that we had about how much we were given, but that was a legislative decision.
Okay, because from the information that I have from the legislature, it says that we should be receiving more. So I'm trying to figure out what happened,
Well,
and
I mean,
where's our money?
From a legislator or from like the Department of Revenue?
Well, I guess who distributes that funds to us? Who's accountable to it?
Department of Revenue allocates those out. I think, if I could, in a summary, I think the challenge with all of those, so I'm not sure which one in particular, but they have continued to be changed every single year in the legislation. So in the last go-around again, they took a lot of the liquor money and excise money and profits away initially after the recession, and that's slowly come back. So I would say we're equal to where we were prior to that over time, but it went down and then back up. Cannabis is similar, and with the state budget trying to fund education, all of those things, again, were on the table. All of them have been taken earmarks out of them. And if you look at the cannabis one in particular, it has a number of earmarks. So it depends on how much they take in, and then there's a list of all the things that it's funding, and then they distribute it to the cities and counties. And that number is a best guesstimate. I think it's really hard to say at any one time. I can tell you what we've earned over the years. I'll send that to you again. But it is very challenging to track. And there are caveats on it, and you can jump in here, that if they earn over $10 million, that there'll be other payments. And so we haven't necessarily seen those because of the calendar year versus the legislative year, but I hope to see some of that.
Brian Henrich, Mayor's Office. Brian's correct, everything he just said. I also remember a couple of years ago that the legislature capped the allocation to all the cities at $6 million, regardless of the amount of revenue that is generated. And so that cap is in place. I don't want to hazard a guess on what it raises statewide, but it's much more than $6 million.
Well, the numbers are phenomenal
Yeah,
in
it's
regards to the
tremendous.
amount of money the state is getting, so I'm just a little perturbed that we're not getting any of that when we have, 10 retailers in, and how many processors here, farmers, process food, whatever the term is. Thank you, growers and processors. And so I'm just a little disappointed because every time we hear a report about the numbers, they are very significant, but there doesn't seem to be any of that share actually coming to the cities who are supporting the policy. But there doesn't appear to be a lot of financial benefit. So I'm a little, I know I'm a broken record, I ask this every single time, but because I think that it should be an economic windfall for us at the cities as well, and the promises are made, but the money doesn't ever seem to come here, and that's the part I'm trying to figure out, and what we need to do as a city to, whatever we need to do, or whatever conversations we need to have to the legislator, or whatever it is, to make sure that we're getting our piece of the pie. So I don't know what that is, but I would like to know what to do.
Well, you've done the first thing because you put it on our priority list to lobby down in Olympia. So that is one of our points that we make every time we come down there, is to not decrease and increase our share for those taxes. The other thing is legislators don't necessarily get into the weeds about exactly how it's implemented. So they know what they intended, and then it gets implemented. So I would just make sure that when you talk to our state elected officials and our legislators, that you let them know the impact that it's having on our community. That's all. And if we can give you more figures about how much we're actually getting so that they're informed, then I think that would be something we could do for all of you. But we talk about it every time we go to Olympia, so, and every time we communicate with our legislators.
And it feels that way, and I know it's on our legislative priorities. I know it's on the AWC's legislative priorities. And when you talk to a legislator, they think the money is coming to us. So something's not happening.
That's being generated, but it's being distributed a different way than they may be aware of.
Thank you.
Council members. Councilmember Barker.
On your first slide, 2017 year-to-date building activity, I'm interested, we've been having conversations within the planning committee to make sure we're defining things so we're actually measuring the same things, and there's been some discrepancy in the past that in our comp plan single family talks about, I think up to 4 or 6 attached units could still be considered single family. When you start doing these, I know we had an increase in infill toolkit use, what are you considering single family and multifamily?
So this comes from the permit based on the statistics that they put out monthly, and single family should only include single family without any attachments, and then multifamily would include duplexes and up, is how I believe this is what I'm showing here.
Okay.
So you're into a whole nother level below this of attached ADUs, or but we could get that information, but this is just a higher categorization.
Yeah, I think I would appreciate, and Mara, maybe when talking with your staff, we need to get a little more clear in these definitions, so when we're reporting out that we can actually see things like the infill toolkit and what that's generating, and not have it get lost, and also just make sure that we're using our terms appropriately. So many times we would talk about a single family could be detached or attached. So I think just as we move forward, we're going to be seeing a lot of different types of building activity, and for me it would be a lot easier to know that we're all talking about the same thing when we're talking about it, and then also when it's being measured, we can be able to show constituents what that building activity is.
Okay.
So I appreciate that in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Hamel, please.
I share Councilmember Vargas's frustration with the cannabis tax. This is really not fair, in my opinion, in terms of what the city gets back. My understanding from your last report was the tax was about $88,000, if I recall correctly. That was a benefit that Bellingham received. Just to put that into perspective, we have a DUI emphasis officer. Part of that person's role is to pull over people who are impaired both by alcohol or marijuana, and that $88,000 does not even doesn't cover the cost of that officer's salary and benefits, which are north of $100,000. My one question is, where do pensions fall into in citywide expenditures? Is that personnel benefits or salaries and wages?
It'd be under benefits for all current employees, and then it's for the left one, which is uniformed officers, police and fire that worked prior to 1977, I believe. That is actually going to show up under a different expense line because that is outside of the current pensions that we have. So that's a prior unfunded liability by the state that we are having to pay, and we're funding that as we're able to pay that going forward. And it includes both pensions, but long-term medical and medical expenses for those employees. And so that is in addition and over and above what is showing in these slides, because that's a separate expenditure.
President Lillquist, please.
Yeah, I share Councilmember Barker's keen interest in understanding the different types of development we're seeing in this community. But I'm going to suggest this is a coarse financial analysis, and we really need that detail to come forward in the planning committee and embed it within that larger discussion. And then the breakdown could be even finer grain, I think.
Council members, anything further? Seeing none, this was for information only. End of committee.